time from the dark magic. If you don't watch until the end, you will regret it. Everyone around you will suffer my wrath. The moment Eleanor stepped into the old Victorian house in rural Ohio, she felt it. A chill that wasn't just the drafty windows. She'd bought the place dirt cheap at auction, a fixer-upper with creaky floors and peeling wallpaper, but it came with a hook. Every night she dreamed of him. A man in a tattered groom's suit standing at the foot of her bed staring with hollow eyes. His lips never moved, but she swore she heard him whisper her name, Eleanor, dragging it out like a sigh from a grave. It started the first night. She woke up gasping, the air thick with the scent of mildew and something sweeter. Roses, maybe, or decay. The figure was gone by morning, but the dreams didn't stop. Each night, he grew clearer. Dark hair slicked back, a boutonniere pinned to his lapel, wilted and brown. She'd blink awake, heart pounding, and find the room unchanged, except for the faint outline of muddy boots on the hardwood floor. Eleanor wasn't one for ghost stories. She'd moved to this nowhere town outside Dayton to escape the city, to start over after a messy divorce. But by week 2, she couldn't deny it. The groom wasn't just a dream. She'd catch glimpses in the cracked mirror above the fireplace, his pale face behind hers, watching. She'd turn, and nothing. Then came the sounds, footsteps pacing. The upstairs hall, a low hum like a wedding march played too slow. Desperate, she dug into the house's history. The local library had microfiche records, yellowed articles about a wedding gone wrong in 1892. Thomas Harrow, a groom-to-be, stood at the altar in this very house, waiting for his bride, Abigail. She never showed. The story said he'd waited all night, then vanished, no body, no trace. Locals whispered he'd died of a broken heart, still dressed in his suit, haunting the place ever since. Eleanor laughed it off at first, small-town gossip. But that night the dream changed. Thomas wasn't at the bed's edge anymore. He was closer, leaning over her, his cold fingers brushing her cheek. "You're here," he rasped, voice like rustling leaves. She screamed herself awake, and there it was, a muddy handprint on her pillow. She tried to leave the next day. Packed a bag, got as far as the front porch, then the door slammed shut on its own. The windows wouldn't budge. Her phone died in her hand, and the humming started again, louder, echoing through the walls. Panic set in as she ran upstairs, locking herself in the bedroom. That's when she saw it, an old trunk in the corner, one she'd never noticed before. Trembling, she opened it. Inside was a wedding veil, yellowed and brittle, and a photograph. Thomas Harrow, stern-faced, next to a woman who looked exactly like her. Same sharp cheekbones, same dark eyes. The realization hit like ice. She wasn't just dreaming of him. He thought she was Abigail, returned at last. The footsteps grew heavier outside the door. Eleanor clutched the veil, heart racing. She could feel him now, his presence seeping through the wood, a cold weight pressing down. "I've waited," his voice hissed through the keyhole. "You promised." She hadn't promised anything, but the house didn't care. It pulsed with him, alive with his longing, his rage. Days blurred into nights. She stopped eating, stopped sleeping. The dreams weren't dreams anymore. He was there, every moment, his hands colder, his grip tighter. She'd wake to find bruises on her arms, shaped like fingers. The mirror showed, her face changing, paler, older, like Abigail's in the photo. He was pulling her in, rewriting her into his story. One night she found the courage to fight back. She grabbed the veil, ran to the fireplace, and lit a match. "You're not getting me," she snarled, tossing it in. The flames roared up, and so did he. Thomas, fully there, his suit dripping mud, his eyes black pits. "You can't leave," he roared, lunging at her. She dodged, scrambling for the door. The house shook, windows shattering, walls groaning. The veil burned, and with it his scream filled the air, a sound of fury and loss. She made it outside, collapsing on the lawn as the house blazed behind her. Fire trucks came, neighbors stared. But Eleanor knew it wasn't over. Weeks later, safe in a Dayton apartment, she thought she'd escaped, until she woke to that smell. Roses and decay. A shadow loomed at her bedside, suit charred, voice a whisper. "I'll wait." She bolted upright, but the muddy boots were back on her floor. He wasn't tied to the house, he was tied to her. And Thomas Harrow never left. The air grew heavy in Eleanor's new life. She'd see him in reflections, gas station windows, her car's rearview mirror, always there, always watching. She tried priests, psychics, even burning sage. Nothing worked. The dreams became demands. "Wear it," he'd hiss, holding out the phantom veil. She'd wake choking, her throat tight as if fabric had wrapped around it. One day she found an old diary in a thrift store. Abigail's, dated 1892. It told the truth. Abigail hadn't run away. Thomas had locked her in that house, demanding she marry him. And when she refused, he'd killed her. Buried her beneath the floorboards. He'd died waiting for her ghost to say yes. Eleanor burned the diary, hoping it'd break the tie. It didn't. That night he was closer than ever, his hands on her shoulders, his breath on her neck. "You're mine," he said, and she felt herself slipping, her reflection in the mirror fading into Abigail's. She fought one last time, drove to the house's ashes, now a blackened lot, and screamed into the wind, "I'm not her!" The air stilled. The smell faded. For a week, silence. She dared to hope. Then in her apartment, a package arrived. No sender, no note. Inside, a new veil, pristine white. She dropped it, sobbing as the humming began again. Thomas wasn't gone. He'd never leave. And now he'd wait forever for her to wear it, to become Abigail, to finish what he started. Eleanor's last stand came on a stormy night. She stood at her window, veil in hand, and whispered, "Fine, take me." She slipped it on. The room spun, her reflection vanished, and Thomas appeared, smiling for the first time. "My bride," he said, pulling her into the dark. No one saw Eleanor again. The apartment stayed empty, but neighbors swore they heard it. A wedding march, slow and warped, drifting from her room at night. And sometimes in the stillness, a woman's scream, cut off too soon. Don't trust the groom. He waits for you too, in old houses, in dreams, in the shadows of thrift store finds. He doesn't leave. He never will. It began with a single letter slipping through the mail slot of Clara's cramped Atlanta apartment. She found it on a muggy June evening. The envelope yellowed, its edges curling like it had been lost for decades. No return address, just her name, Clara Evans, in spidery ink. Inside, a love note. "My heart beats only for you, my darling. James." She didn't know a James. The paper smelled of dust and something sour, and the date in the corner read June 12th, 1947. Clara shrugged it off, some prank, maybe a mix-up. She tossed it in the trash and went to bed. But the next day another came. Same handwriting, same tone. "I dream of your laughter, Clara. I'll find you soon." Dated June 13th, 1947. Her skin prickled. By the end of the week, 5 letters sat on her kitchen counter, each more desperate. "Why don't you answer me? I'm so close." The air in her apartment grew heavy, thick with that sour smell. She called the post office. No record of the letters, just her usual bills. And junk mail. She checked the slot. It was empty when she left for work, but every evening another waited. Clara stopped sleeping. She'd hear it at night, the faint scrape of paper on tile, like something pushed it through from the other side. Desperate, she took the letters to a friend at the Georgia Historical Society. Mark frowned as he read them, then pulled an old file. "James Whitlock," he said, voice low. "Lived here in the 40s, wrote love letters to a woman named Clara Evans, his fiancée. She died in a car crash before the wedding. James lost it, kept writing her, convinced she'd come back. He mailed dozens before he vanished in 47. Clara's stomach dropped. She wasn't that Clara. Was she? That night, the letter was different. "I see you now," it read. "You're so beautiful." She locked the door, checked the windows. Nothing. But the scrape came again, louder, and she saw it. A shadow under the slot, too long to be human. Her phone buzzed. No signal. The lights flickered. She grabbed a knife, heart hammering, and waited. Morning brought silence, and another letter. "Why do you hide from me?" She burned it, but the smoke curled into words. "I'm here." Clara screamed, stomping the ashes. She moved out the next day. Couch surfed with Mark, thinking distance would stop it. It didn't. Letters appeared on his doorstep. "You can't run. I'll wait." She stopped opening them, but they piled up. Mark found more in the archives. James hadn't just vanished. He'd hanged himself in that apartment building, clutching a stack of unsent letters. The original Clara's death had broken him, and now this Clara, her name, her face, was his obsession reborn. "He thinks you're her," Mark whispered. The letters turned darker. "You promised me forever. Don't make me take you." She'd wake to ink smudges on her hands, as if she'd written back. One night she heard it, a voice, faint and hoarse. "Clara." It came from the walls. She bolted upright, and there it was, a letter on her pillow, still wet with ink. "Look behind you." She didn't turn. She ran, out of Mark's place, into the humid night. But the letters followed, slipped under motel doors, tucked into her car's wipers. "I'm yours," they said. "You're mine." She burned them all in a gas station trash can, watching the flames eat his words. For a day, silence. She dared to breathe. Then the phone rang. Her dead landline, unplugged in the motel. She answered, trembling. Static. Then his voice. "Why won't you read me?" The line cut out, and a letter slid under the door. She didn't touch it, just stared as the ink bled through. "I'll make you see." Clara stopped running. She went back to Atlanta, to the apartment where it started. The letters waited, hundreds now spilling from the slot, covering the floor. She sat among them, reading each one. "I love you. I need you. I'm here." Her eyes burned, her hands shook, but she kept going. The air thickened, the sour smell choking her. At the last letter, she felt him, cold fingers on her neck. "You read me," James whispered, his voice in her ear. She turned, and there he was, pale, gaunt, eyes black with longing. "My Clara," he said, reaching for her. She didn't scream. She didn't fight. The letters had won. No one saw Clara again. The apartment was cleared, the letters gone, except one, found years later in a thrift store box. "To my darling," it began, dated 1947. The buyer smiled, charmed by the romance, until the next day, when another slipped through her door. "Don't read the messages. They find you, in old envelopes, in the quiet of night. James waits for his Clara, and if you answer, he'll never let you go." The days after Clara's vanishing were quiet, but Atlanta whispered. Tenants in her old building heard it. Faint scratches at the mail slot, a voice murmuring Clara in the dark. Some found letters too, unsigned, undated, pleading for love. They burned them, moved out, but the messages followed. Mark tried to forget. He'd lost his friend, but the guilt lingered. One night, he found a letter on his desk. "Tell her I'm waiting." He tore it up, but the ink stained his fingers, and the words echoed in his dreams. He stopped sleeping, too. The letters spread, slipping into mailboxes across the city, then the state. Each one bore a name, not always Clara's. James was searching, his longing a curse unbound by time. People burned them, prayed, fled, but the messages kept coming. One woman, Sarah, didn't burn hers. She read it, "My heart is yours," and smiled, thinking it sweet. The next night, another came, then another. She stopped smiling when the voice began, calling her Clara, promising forever. She vanished a week later. The letters don't stop, they find you, tucked in old books, slipped under doors, waiting in the mail. Each one pulls you closer to him. James, the man who won't let go. Don't read them, don't answer. He's waiting for you too. Clara's story faded, but the letters didn't. They became legend. Urban tales of love turned to terror. Some say James haunts the postal routes, slipping his pleas into the world. Others say he's in the paper itself, his soul bleeding through the ink. One letter sits in a museum now behind glass. Visitors swear it moves, shifts slightly when no one's looking. A guard quit after hearing a whisper from it. Clara. The museum won't say how many staff have found letters in their homes. Don't read the messages, they're not just words, they're him reaching out, pulling you in. James Whitlock doesn't rest. He writes forever, and if you read one, you're his. The last letter Clara read wasn't found. Some think she took it with her, into whatever dark place James pulled her to. Others say it's still out there, waiting for someone new. Maybe it'll find you, slipping through your door, whispering your name. Don't touch it, don't look, he's in the words and he's hungry for you. The messages don't stop, they never will. The curse is loose and it's coming for you next. Subscribe to Mysteries Beyond Death to fend off the shadows. Hit that button, like the video, ring the bell, and drop a comment with your darkest fear. Don't let the whispers find you alone in the dark.